On the night of February 10th, 1941, Major Trevor Pritchard hit the ground with a hard thud, his parachute billowing behind him. Disentangling himself, the stunned soldier quickly scanned the dark countryside, thankful the drop had gone as planned. His men gathered around him near the Tragino Aqueduct, their breath visible in the cold Italian night. Pritchard counted heads. Just then, the news hit. The demolition expert team, along with most of the explosives, had missed the drop zone entirely and were likely not to arrive anytime soon. Pritchard's mind raced. Operation Colossus, the first British airborne mission, was simple in theory. Destroy the aqueduct that supplied water to millions in Apulia, crippling Mussolini's war efforts. But without the sappers, the men from 10th Troop had only 640 pounds of guncotton. Now, the job had become almost impossible. Rallying his men, he made the call to approach the structure to see where its weak points were. By the time the sun rose, his team would have either made history or disappeared into it. Last one standing. In May 1940, in the early morning light, German gliders sliced through the skies over Belgium and landed atop Fort Ébon-Émile. As dozens of paratroopers burst from their vehicles, the fortress, once thought impenetrable, became the stage for an unprecedented assault. The Germans' powerful explosives tore through the defenses. Within hours, the fort's towering walls were no more, and the helpless soldiers inside were overpowered. This daring operation cleared the way for ground forces to press forward in their advance toward France. Inspired by these wildly dramatic results, the Allied governments sought to adapt and counter these strategies that had taken Europe by storm. Now, with the Luftwaffe dominating the skies all over Europe and the threat of an amphibious assault on English shores imminent, Britain stood alone, facing the very real possibility of a German invasion. Yet, Winston Churchill remained adamant that Britain needed not just to defend, but also to strike back. In June, the Prime Minister directed the War Office in a memorandum that stated, quote, "We ought to have a corps of at least 5,000 parachute troops. I hear something is being done already to form such a corps, but only, I believe, on a very small scale. Advantage must be taken of the summer to train 3 forces, who can nonetheless play their part meanwhile as shock troops in home defenses." Following this request, on June 20th, the War Office formalized the structure of the Commando organization and authorized the creation of a specialized parachute unit. This new force, officially named No. 2 Commando, was initially composed of 500 men drawn from the British Army, with provisions for future expansion. I won't jump. The first specialized parachute unit had been formed, and training was about to begin at a Royal Air Force base near Manchester, with the aerial branch supporting the effort by providing Armstrong Whitworth Whitley bombers explicitly modified to transport paratroopers. Joining this elite unit demanded exceptional qualities. Volunteers needed youth, physical fitness, intelligence, and a fiercely independent spirit. Practical skills like driving heavy vehicles, swimming, and being immune to seasickness were emphasized. However, despite Churchill's ambitious goal of assembling thousands of airborne troops as fast as possible, the War Office faced significant challenges. Britain had few gliders, and those available were too lightweight for military use. Even the transport aircraft capable of towing them and the paratroopers were also in very short supply, mainly due to the pricey aftermath of the Battle of France. Even more importantly, during the initial stages of the rigorous preparation, many recruits failed to complete the program due to a mix of inexperience and fear, particularly concerns that their parachutes might fail to deploy, resulting in outright refusal to do it. By the summer of 1940, while 3,500 volunteers had been selected, only 500 continued their training due to these constraints. In September, this number drastically dropped to only 21 officers and 321 other ranks. Nonetheless, in November, the unit was reorganized into a parachute wing, a glider wing, and a battalion headquarters, completing its parachute training the following month. After successful demonstrations for military observers, the No. 2 Commando unit, subsequently renamed as the 11th Special Air Service Battalion, was finally deemed ready for operational deployment. From its ranks, 38 of the best and most highly trained members designated as 10th Troop, were selected for a bold mission to test both British airborne capability and the RAF's precision in delivering troops to a targeted location via parachute. This mission, named Operation Colossus, would mark the first true test of Britain's nascent airborne forces. The target. By early 1941, the small Italian town of Colitri in southern Campania province, perched on a hilltop, had largely been spared the ravages of war that gripped the majority of northern Europe and North Africa. There, for the most part, life carried on as it always had, even as its young men left to join the Royal Italian Armed Forces. It was precisely in this town that the British War Office decided to perform its first ever airborne drop operation. The target was the Tragino Aqueduct, a vital structure that supplied water to the Apulia region, home to nearly 2 million Italians, and most importantly, the critical port of Taranto. The aqueduct's remote inland location ruled out a seaborne assault, and its robust construction was deemed impervious to aerial bombing. An airborne raid, carried out by highly trained parachute troops, was considered the only viable method to destroy it and deliver a blow so deep into enemy territory. Disrupting this lifeline would not only strain the civilian population's morale, but hopefully also hinder Italy's military operations in North Africa and Albania. In January, the 38-man team of 10th Troop, including 7 officers, began training. Leading them was Major T.A.G. Pritchard of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, a determined officer, while 3 Italian-speaking interpreters were also attached to the unit. After the selection of 10th Troop was complete, Pritchard and his men were immediately segregated from the rest of the trainees and relocated into a large wooden building where they were to be kept in isolation and under strict supervision by plainclothes security men, vigilant for any potential security breach. For 6 intense weeks, the men of 10th Troop honed their skills day in and day out, including a full-scale replica of the aqueduct that allowed the troops to rehearse their assault with precision. On the night of February 10th, 6 Whitley bombers from the No. 51 Squadron RAF would transport them from Malta to the target. Nearly simultaneously, 2 additional bombers would stage a diversionary attack at railway yards at Foggia, 60 miles to the north, drawing attention away from the aqueduct. At precisely 9:30 p.m., 10th Troop would parachute into the target area, execute their attack, and demolish the facilities with powerful explosives, with the help of a team of Royal Engineer sappers led by Captain G.F.K. Daly. Following the raid, they were to make a grueling 50-mile journey across hostile territory to the mouth of the Selle River, where the submarine HMS Triumph would extract them on the night of February 15th. Ready or not. On February 7th, 10th Troop boarded 6 modified Whitley bombers, embarking on a 1,600-mile flight to Malta. The journey, which passed over occupied France, remained uneventful, though every moment felt like borrowed time. Upon landing, the men were shown fresh reconnaissance photographs of the target, 2 aqueducts nestled in the Italian countryside, one larger than the other. After a tense discussion, it was decided the larger aqueduct would be their objective. 3 days later, on February 10th, the mission began in earnest, when at precisely 6:30 p.m., the 6 bombers roared into the sky from Malta, carrying 1 officer and 5 troopers aboard each aircraft. The night was clear, and the visibility was perfect. At 9:42 p.m., the lead Whitley reached the drop zone, releasing its team into the Italian darkness. Minutes later, the next 4 aircraft followed suit, their groups all landing within 270 yards of the designated zone. Just then, the mission began to crack. 2 bombers failed to release their equipment due to icing in the drop mechanisms. And much worse still, the 6th aircraft, which carried the Royal Engineers sapper demolition experts with the majority of the explosives, missed the drop zone entirely, releasing them and their invaluable equipment in a valley more than 2 miles away from the aqueduct. On the ground, Pritchard and the men of 10th Troop gathered in silence, the reality of the situation settling over them. With the sappers nowhere to be seen, Operation Colossus's success hung by the thinnest of threads. Now, the team was left to face the impossible, taking down the aqueduct by themselves. What to do? As Captain Daly's sapper team veered off course, the rest of 10th Troop gathered near the aqueduct under the dim starlight. When Major Pritchard arrived, he was quickly briefed. The target was unguarded, save for one local man, now detained, but Daly's demolition team and the bulk of the explosives were nowhere to be found. With time slipping away, Pritchard wasted none of it, and the leader quickly ordered a group of captured locals to help carry the heavy slabs of guncotton they did have, while securing the women and children around the area in a nearby farmhouse. To the Englishmen's surprise, the Italians not only cooperated, but joked through the interpreters that nothing exciting ever happened in this part of Italy, and that night's events would be talked about for years. Covering parties fanned out as rehearsed, rifles ready, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of trouble. At the base of one towering pier, 2 of the soldiers worked quickly, chiseling away to assess the structure. What they discovered shocked them. The aqueduct was reinforced concrete, far tougher than the bricks they had trained and hoped for. Pritchard knew that without Daly's team, tearing down the structure would be much harder. Unwilling to let the mission fail, he made the call. 640 pounds of guncotton would be placed against the westernmost pier, with the rest, about 160 pounds, at the abutment. To top it off, a small portion would be set under a nearby bridge crossing the Ginestra River in a final effort to damage the infrastructure. Hauling the 50-pound slabs of guncotton to the aqueduct was grueling work, done primarily by the captured Italians. Meanwhile, Pritchard stayed at the site as the groups carried the explosives in silence, save for occasional whispered jokes and muttered curses. The stillness of the night was broken only by the barking of farm dogs, a common sound in the Italian countryside, where the animals guarded livestock from foxes and wolves. Tick-tock. Precisely at 12:30 a.m. on February 11th, Pritchard gave the signal to trigger the explosives, just as everyone ran for cover. The seconds dragged on. Nobody had counted the time, and Pritchard and Patterson, his second-in-command, exchanged uneasy glances, both grappling with the thought of a faulty fuse. But just as they decided to investigate, taking cautious steps toward the structure, a thunderous crack tore through the air, accompanied by a blinding flash. The powerful guncotton ignited with ferocious force, the blast wave hurling everyone standing right onto the ground. Before they could recover, a second explosion erupted from the smaller bridge, sending chunks of concrete skyward. Debris rained down in heavy thuds, crashing across the farm roofs and scattering across the area. As Pritchard and one of his men ran back to the blast site, everyone's minds filled with doubt. They all knew the odds had been stacked against them. Their explosives were scarce, the night was much damper than expected, and their intelligence about the aqueduct's construction was almost non-existent, even after 6 weeks of punishing training. When the 2 officers finally emerged from the darkness, their smiles signaled a spark of hope. Before anyone could ask anything, Pritchard quickly silenced the noise rising around him with a raised hand, telling them in a low yet commanding voice, quote, "Listen." The men froze, straining their ears. Just then, it came, a thunderous rush of fresh water, a newborn waterfall where there had been none only minutes before. The sound confirmed it. The Tragino Aqueduct, including the western pier and the smaller bridge, was down. Operation Colossus, against all odds, had succeeded. Hasty retreat. At 1 a.m., with the aqueduct reduced to rubble, the men of 10th Troop began their retreat. One of them, who had broken his ankle during the parachute landing, was left behind with a local farmer, while the rest of the team split into 3 groups and moved as fast as they could toward the coast, ready to rendezvous with HMS Triumph for extraction. However, the mission's success turned bitter as the retreat quickly unraveled. First, Major Pritchard's group was spotted by a farmer who alerted the nearby village, and not much later, they were surrounded by a unit of enraged carabinieri. With limited ammunition and vastly outnumbered, Pritchard made the difficult decision to surrender, and his once inspiring leadership was forced to yield under these impossible circumstances. The other groups fared no better. The 2 teams from the aqueduct site were discovered by Italian soldiers and ambushed. After brief firefights, they too were forced to lay down their arms. Finally, the 3rd group, including the missing sappers, attempted a daring bluff, claiming to be German soldiers conducting a field exercise, but their ruse fell apart when a suspicious mayor demanded identity papers, leading to their capture by local carabinieri. stripped of their weapons and gear, the captured troops were transported to Naples before being sent to the POW camp at Sulmona. One of the Italian interpreters, Fortunato Picci, suffered a harsher fate. Accused of treason, he was taken to Rome, tried, and convicted by the Special Tribunal for the Defense of the State. Unknown to every single one of these men, even if they had reached the rendezvous point, escape was unlikely. As it turned out, one of the Whitley bombers conducting a diversionary raid on Foggia had suffered engine failure and was forced to ditch near the mouth of the River Sella, at exactly the same location as the extraction. Concerned that the bomber's distress signal had been intercepted, British command canceled HMS Triumph's mission, fearing a trap. Success or defeat? Major Trevor Pritchard spent the remainder of his time in Italy as a prisoner of war. Initially held at Sulmona and later moved to San Romano. Appointed senior British officer amongst the other POWs, he continued to lead with determination, organizing one ambitious escape attempt after another, though all were unsuccessful. The destruction of the Tragino Aqueduct did not significantly disrupt the Italian war effort, as the structure was rapidly fixed following the attack. Yet, the February event definitely unsettled the Italian government and population, leading to heightened air raid precautions and the diversion of troops to guard similar infrastructure, valuable resources that could have been used at the front. These measures remained in place until Italy's surrender over a year and a half later. Operation Colossus was far from perfect, with flaws ranging from planning, particularly regarding the extraction of troops, to limited intelligence about the target. Nonetheless, it was a bold statement. Britain was ready to strike back, even in its darkest hour. The operation offered vital lessons in equipment, logistics, and strategy. From their very modest and limited beginning, British airborne forces soon evolved into a critical component of the Allied war effort. Thanks to the men from the 11th Special Air Service Battalion, they paved the way for larger and more ambitious missions, such as the Bruneval raid, airborne actions in North Africa, and the iconic operations of D-Day.